Well, good to see everyone. Happy holidays. I hope the tropical storm-like thing that we had over here was not too bad on the East Coast. But wow, December and a tropical event is pretty unusual. Anyway, so today I thought, since it is this time of year when some of us are probably looking at making donations and things kind of to finalize the end of the year. I thought I would talk a little bit about the Paramitas, the perfections, the six perfections. And everybody's probably heard these talks before, but I think it's always a good reminder. I like to remind it myself of it. And so the six perfections are one of the basic, teachings in Buddhism. And Thich Nhat Hanh, he explained that the Chinese character for Paramita means crossing over to the other shore, which means the shore of peace, non-fear, and liberation, is the way he puts it. And that the practice of the Paramitas can be the practice of our daily lives, right? The perfections, or perfect realization. So they're practices, and I always like to remind myself that they're not just kind of concepts. The Paramitas, as the Buddha taught them, were practices. And the six are Dana Paramita, the generosity or the practice of giving. Shila Paramita, the precepts, practicing the precepts. Shanti Paramita, the practice of, or the capacity to transform suffering inflicted on us by other people, especially the people we love. Virya Paramita, diligence or effort. Dhyana Paramita, meditation, and Prajna Paramita, wisdom or insight. So those are the six perfections that the Buddha taught. And today, since it's the end of the year, I thought I'd talk about Dana Paramita. And Dana Paramita, and it's interesting. I think to start, I looked up the definition of practice. What's the definition of a practice? And so the internet, of course, the keeper of all the knowledge, and it's always true, defines that as a noun, practice means the actual application or use of an idea, belief, or method, as opposed to theories relating to it. And as a verb, it means to perform an activity or exercise or skill repeatedly or regularly in order to improve or maintain one's proficiency, which is, I think, exactly how Dana Paramita becomes a verb, right? A practice, something that we do, and kind of an action. And again, so Dana Paramita is a perfection that can help take us to the other shore, right? The shore of less suffering, of non-suffering, peace, liberation, and fear. And we can be generous in lots of different ways, right? And I think what's most important is the motivation or the intention behind our practice or our action of being generous. At the most basic level, the true practice of Dana is the act of giving for the sake of just giving, right? With no expectation of getting anything in return from others, or maybe even more importantly, ourselves. So we have to look at our I don't know if motivations is the right word, but our intentions or what's motivating us to be generous, and what is motivating us in terms of how generous we are. Am I being generous so people think highly of me, right? They think I'm a great guy. Am I being generous so that I can feel better about myself, right? I feel better about myself that, you know, if I'm being generous to people. Am I being generous because it'll, you know, somehow help my reputation, right? If I have my name on a building, then does that make me somebody, right? And or am I expecting some kind of gratitude or appreciation, you know, for or in return for being generous? You know, and my experience is that these are really interesting things to observe, especially at this time of year when, you know, generosity is at the forefront. Thanksgiving is at the forefront of a lot of what we do. And I haven't looked at the things that come up during the act of being generous. It seems to me that a lot of that is just ways in which my sense of self reaffirms itself, right? Oh, Andy's a generous guy. Oh, you know, he's a great guy. He gives to here, he gives to there. What a great guy, right? And so to observe that, I think is it can be a very deep practice. Giving for just the sake of giving, for just to be generous, and to maybe, if we have an intention to develop a generous heart, you know, the heart that just gives for the sake of giving, maybe to lessen suffering, someone else's suffering, and our own. It can be a very deep practice. And the practice, I think, is to be present to what's coming up, right? As I'm making my decisions to be generous and how generous to be. And to observe that mindfully and you know, see what my motivations are, see what my intentions really are, what's bringing me to the point of being generous, and then working with that. So, you know, how can we be generous? Dharma takes the form of a lot of different things, and some of it maybe is even counterintuitive. At least it was for me. Obviously, we can give of our wealth, right? We can donate money, we can donate material possessions, and how we do that, again, can be a practice, right? I was always taught, you know, by my teachers that you know, the first impulse is always kind of the easy one, right? It's like, oh, I'll give what, I'm just picking a number. I'm going to give $100, right? But then to say, well, you know, that was easy, right? We need to practice where the edge is, right? Where the resistance is. So, you know, maybe give a little more until something starts pulling back, something starts hesitating. You know, that's not to say that there aren't, you know, constraints that we have, fiscal constraints, let's say. But there's also this, whatever that is that pulls us back at some point, says, oh, that's too much. You know, is it a fiscal constraint, or is it an attachment constraint? Where's the point at which I start pulling back a little bit? And that's where we practice, and that's where we can sit with what is that? We can sit with the koan of what am I getting out of that, right? What is it that's resisting giving $10 more or $5 more, right? What is that? And to look deeply at that. The next thing we can do, and maybe in this day and age might even be more valuable than cold hard cash, is our time. Right? I mean, everyone is so busy with so much going on and cell phones that just speed everything up, that a lot of times our time is more valuable than anything else. How much time and energy can I commit to being of service, right? To relieving suffering. And when I commit to that, again, where's the point at which I start pulling back? Yes, there are time constraints. There's only 24 hours in a day, but where do I start resisting being generous with my time? Right? I mean, we chant the Bodhisattva vows at the end of every sitting. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Well, that's a big commitment of time if they're numberless. So sitting with the resistance to committing more time, I think, is where the rubber meets the road again, and is that edge where the practice is there's something going on there that we need to look at very carefully and experience. And then we can be present. We can be generous with our time, with our presence, with our presence. Just to be present to someone else's suffering, right? To sit with someone that's suffering, not to resist the urge, or maybe I'm speaking for myself, but to resist the urge to fix it, to tell them they shouldn't be suffering, lots of words of advice that a lot of times can make it worse because it just invalidates what their experience right then is. But just to be present, right, and validate that they're suffering, and offer our presence. I think everybody's probably heard me rehash the story of my Cuban immigrant father, who used to rehash losing everything in Cuba every day at 3:30. Every day for 40 years, I'd tell him, just stop. It's 40 years ago. Just leave it alone. We've heard it all already, and that seemed to just make him suffer more. But when I looked at that one day and just started, just being present to it, because that was his, that's who he was, that was his reality. Suddenly, the whole relationship to that changed, and he started even catching himself saying, "Oh, I'm doing that again." I said, "Yeah, that's it's 3:30. That's what you do." So, being generous with our presence is a way to practice Dana Paramita. And again, and is also maybe even one of the harder things to do these days, with so much distraction with phones, and how much time do we actually spend fully present to someone else? Even family members and our children. So we have to, in the definition of practice as a verb, we have to work at this repeatedly to be better at it, to be able to spend more time truly present to another suffering. And then, can also be resistance, right, to being really present to somebody else's suffering. Um, I again, just speaking for myself, that can be uncomfortable. And so do we avoid really being present? I know I've certainly done that in the past, and it's something that takes practice to be fully present to another's suffering. And then the one that I think is always kind of counterintuitive is we can be generous by giving people space. Right? A lot of times when someone's suffering, a death, bad news health-wise, we want to help, right? We want to rush in and we want to comfort and we want to take care of them. But sometimes that's not what a person needs, right? Sometimes they need space because they have to come to terms with it and really look at it and sit with it themselves. And again, sometimes the rush to help is, at least in my experience, was a lot of that it was related to my own discomfort with seeing other people suffering. I have to stop that. I have to fix that. But maybe that's not my thing to fix. Maybe I can't fix it. That's not to say that we shouldn't try, right, to help, because we do have that bodhisattva vow. But how we go about it takes a lot of, I think, mindfulness and practice to discern what's the best form of generosity in the moment, right? Skillful means, upaya. We have to, and that takes a practice. I think that's where our sitting practice comes in. Can we see things clearly and from a grounded place? But ultimately, I think practicing dana paramita, generosity, in a intentional way, and working with the things that come up while I'm doing it, is really the practice of looking at what we're always trying to look at, right? The true nature of the self. Right? The things that come up when I'm making a decision to be generous all relate to my sense of self. And the more generous I think I can be, the less separation I feel. If I'm practicing generosity from a place of just wanting to be generous. Whereas when I'm not being generous, or I'm wanting something in return, then although I've been generous, maybe there's even a little more feeling of separation, because it's a business transaction of some kind. And in a way, it relates to also looking at how our attachment and aversion to the 8 worldly concerns comes into play too, right? Praise and blame, gain and loss, happiness and suffering, and fame and bad reputation. How is all that working within me, and how is it coming up, and how is it impacting, specifically just for today, my ability to be truly generous? How does that impact that in my life? I've always been amazed at you go to charity events now, and and I understand that it's effective, but charity events, when they fundraise, you give money, but maybe you get something for it, right? You get, and it's very effective, I guess, from the philanthropic world. It's very effective, but I always kind of chuckle to myself, like, am I going to donate, let's just say $500 because I have a chance to win a cruise? And what does that mean about my generosity? So these are the kind of things that I think are always good to work with when we're in a situation, a fundraising event or some other event where there's an opportunity to practice dana. So, at this time of year, I always like to invite everyone to make the act of giving a practice, a process. At this time of year, it can be an expression also, and a practice of gratitude, right? We can practice gratitude by sharing the things that are most valuable to us: our possessions, our time, our presence, our attention. We can also practice gratitude in that way. So it's a wonderful thing to work with. And ultimately, we can fulfill our bodhisattva vow in some small ways, maybe by helping to reduce the suffering of others and ourselves through being generous. So I would invite everyone to practice dana, paramita, for the holidays, and enjoy it as a practice. It can bring up some difficult things when we look at it, but it's also a joyful thing to feel letting go of the attachment of the things that we find most dear. I think it at least for me, has been a way of letting go of the attachments that create suffering and worry, right? And anxiety about the future for some reason. So I would invite everyone to practice at least that first perfection for the holidays.